I'm Heather Hadjistavropoulos, and I'm a professor of psychology at the University of Regina. And I do a number of different things at the university, but one of the things that I do is I lead this thing called PSPNET, which I'm going to talk to you about today. And then Nathalie is going to follow it up and talk about PSPNET families and Garnet families as well. And just as I begin, I really, want to thank everybody who's on the line today and just really, I think I think it's really great when people come out to a talk about mental health and about families. It shows just that desire that you have, like just that step of coming forward is just like that desire to make things better. Either it might be for yourself or your colleagues or your family, but it's a really important step, just being at a presentation like this today. As I begin, I would like to acknowledge that I work at the University of Regina, as does Nathalie, and we are located on Treaty 4 land, which has a presence in Treaty 6 lands as well. And these are the territories of the Nehiyawak, Anishinaabe, Nakota, Lakota, and Dakota, and the homeland of the Métis Méchief Nation. And as professors at the university and people that are leading these organizations, we're committed to improving our understanding of Indigenous peoples, including Indigenous PSP and their families. So PSPNet, I guess I just want to start off with the message that I want you to take home with you is that we are here to help public safety personnel, including police, when you need us. So it might not be today, but maybe in the future. It might not be you, but maybe your colleague. So just want you to know why I'm here. Just really trying to be a resource for when people are feeling like they're experiencing challenges, as Casey mentioned here today. Would like to acknowledge the team that I work with and the funders that we have. So we're funded by the federal government and some provincial funding sources. The team is made up of clinicians, but also researchers, trainees, and then operational staff that really help us with the technology and the administrative support as well. So just a few of the people, and we work, lots of us in Saskatchewan, but many in other areas like Quebec, Ontario, Nova Scotia. PSPNET is part of the Canadian Institute for Public Safety Research and Treatment, and I'm not going to talk too much about that, but I just want you to know that PSPNET is sort of the treatment arm of this organization, which I hope you've heard about, but they also have many resources on their website. So if you go to www.cipcert.ca, you'll see the work that they're really trying to do to bring different types of research to public safety personnel through knowledge mobilization work. So they offer webinars. They have a conference that's coming up in May, and Casey is very much involved in this organization and the leadership and insight into really how do we best serve public safety personnel. So PSPNet was really formed because of this research dating back to 2018, showing and really highlighting, maybe in a way that people hadn't known before this, just how significant mental health difficulties are in public safety personnel. And that includes in police. So in this particular graph, you'll see in the gray are the sort of the percentage of people in the general population that are experiencing mental health symptoms at a clinical level. And then in the blue is the percentage of police that are experiencing clinical symptoms of mental health difficulties. And what's really striking about this is that when you look at mental health of police, when they first come in, they're actually lower than those gray bars. And then as they move on in their career, we see that they're much higher. So the top that towards any mental health disorder you'll see is at 35%. The top disorders that PSP are impacted by, and this is actually the data for police, are generalized anxiety, major depressive disorder, and post-traumatic stress. And so I think sometimes when people hear those labels, they think, well, maybe I don't think that's me. But the one thing about each of these disorders is it's not like a single symptom, it's a constellation of symptoms. And when I actually look at the police who come to work with me at PSPNET, what does it actually look like when they are reporting anxiety, depression, or post-traumatic stress disorder? The symptoms, the most common symptoms might not be what you would expect. So when you look at depression symptoms among police, the top symptom that somebody who would likely have a diagnosis of depression is actually feeling tired or having very little energy, trouble falling or staying asleep, and then that little interest or pleasure in doing things, which I think Casey was really talking about when he was speaking. And then the fourth one, the fourth most common symptom is maybe the more classic symptom, which is feeling down, depressed, or hopeless, and then feeling bad about yourself. And I think that sometimes the sleep difficulties and that lack of interest maybe just get wrapped up as being feeling like that's just part of the job. But anyways, that's how clients really who are police are presenting with depression. That's sort of the order of frequency of the symptoms. When you look at anxiety, actually the number one symptom that clients have who have clinical levels of anxiety, the first symptom is actually that being easily annoyed or irritable. And that often doesn't, sometimes it might come up at work, but it often what we hear is that it comes up at home. And sort of after that, you have that feeling of being on edge and just a difficult time relaxing. So you're like high energy at work and then just really having a hard time shutting down afterwards. And then it's sort of after that that you start to see that clients will also be reporting like rumination and having a hard time stopping or controlling worry. So things that have happened at work, you can't turn them off. When it comes to PTSD, the top symptom that our clients are reporting is again that problem with sleeping, difficulty concentrating, and that being alert and on guard. And then we get into this feeling of being distant or cut off from people, and then irritable. And then it's kind of the more classic symptom, which is being upset when something reminds you of a stressful experience that you've had. And so I think it's helpful for people to see that and realize that some of these things that you might be experiencing and might be normalizing could actually be signs that there's something else that's going on. My work is this internet delivered cognitive behavior therapy, which I hope some of you have heard about before, and Casey mentioned in his talk. And I was asked to work on the development of this for public safety personnel across Canada, because what we know is that although mental health difficulties are very common in PSP because of the nature of their work, we also know that most PSP, when they're surveyed, report challenges accessing mental health care. So the vast majority are having difficulties getting care and maybe sufficient care. And actually, the three top reasons that people are not getting care, actually, the number one reason is this preference to self-manage, which I think is such a good positive characteristic in public safety personnel. But it's also something that gets in the way of actually reaching out and asking for help because you just have this feeling like you can work on this on your own. Second reason is that it's just inconvenient. Public safety personnel are some of the busiest people that I know because of the work that they do, and then also how involved they are in their families and their communities. And so just that whole thing of taking the time, even if you're struggling, to ask for help and make things better can be very difficult. Sometimes it's about inconvenience, and sometimes it's about not being accessible, which I know some police would experience depending on where they work in Saskatchewan. And then the third thing, of course, is concern about privacy, which again, I think these are three things that are common in the general population, but just are really heightened in public safety personnel and in police. So concern about others finding out, which also, Casey talked about as well. I think his case is just a perfect example of what my service is all about. So what we try and do in internet delivered cognitive behavior therapy is overcome those three barriers by offering cognitive behavior therapy online in a different way. So we're not trying to replicate face-to-face treatment. We know that face-to-face treatment is great, and actually we really are highly supportive of it. And because we think it's so good, we're trying to make it more accessible. And so what we do, instead of people seeing a therapist online and getting information, instead we put that information that's normally shared in face-to-face treatment online in the form of a course that most people complete in about 8 weeks, sometimes a bit longer, depending on what's going on in their lives. And then instead of offering support through face-to-face treatment, we offer that support mostly through secure messaging and phone calls. And so we do this because this gives PSP more the ability to self-manage in a way that we know that they want. It makes it more convenient. You can log on and look at information in the middle of the night, in the early morning, on weekends, on breaks, whenever it's convenient for you. And then that form of getting support through this secure messaging and or phone calls feels more private. And sometimes it's a very good first step in care, or sometimes it can actually be like you've had some face-to-face care, and this can be sort of a follow-up care as well. So we're specifically focused on bringing cognitive behavior therapy online, and we do that because this is a very well-researched form of treatment that we know works very well face-to-face, and it also works really well online. And in this form of therapy, what we're trying to do is help clients identify and work on thoughts, so how you think about the world, and behaviors, the types of things that you're doing and how they impact you, and then also what you're feeling, and really trying to recognize that cycle between what you're feeling emotionally or physically and the thoughts you're having and the behaviors you have. The other thing about this approach is that it's very much focused on the things you can control. So there's lots of things in your life that might be contributing to difficulties that you're having. We would just really try and focus on like what is in that sphere of control. And it's sometimes about how you think about the world, about those behaviors, and then how you manage your physical symptoms. I just want to give you an example of what I mean when we say we take what's done in face-to-face treatment and put it online in the form of a course. So this is what's called our well-being course. It's the most common course. It's for diverse mental health difficulties, and we teach strategies that really apply to different types of mental health concerns. So in the first lesson, it's really about identifying the symptoms that you're experiencing and the cycle that you're going through between what are the thoughts that you're having, and what are the behaviors that you're doing, and what are the physical symptoms and the emotions that you're having. In the second lesson, it's really about teaching about identifying and challenging thoughts, and realizing that we can actually identify these things that are going on in our mind, and come up with alternative ways of thinking about things that can make a difference. It's also about managing, in the third lesson, managing physical symptoms, so especially hyperarousal, so that what happens when you're at work and you get really revved up, and then when you come off work and you need to reduce that, but also managing that under arousal that sometimes happens for PSP. So getting very over aroused at work, and then after work, sort of having that swing to under arousal. In the fourth lesson, we really work on managing avoidance and safety behaviors, and what those behaviors look like varies from client to client, and even what the thoughts look like, what thoughts you might have compared to someone else would be different. And the final lesson is really about long-term goal setting and realizing, gosh, everything that Casey said is so true, that mental health is like your physical health. It's like a long-term habit. And especially when you are in these high-risk careers, it's working on your mental health on a ongoing basis. The materials I should mention that we use were initially developed in Australia. They've been used in another unit that I run that I'm going to tell you about as well, and that have been adapted for PSP, so with and for PSP. And we've been working on this adaptation. This course has actually been tweaked. I think we're now on like the 10th version of it, where we're tweaking and adding in different examples and stories to help people really learn that material. You may wonder, why do we offer this therapist support, especially via messaging? And we do that because it's convenient. You can write your message to a therapist, when it's convenient for you. You also control what's shared. There's some benefits that you get from writing down what you're experiencing. And then in addition to that, you get messages back from your therapist that you can repeatedly review. And we also know that this approach is very much supported by research and has a lot of benefits. One thing I'd just like to mention is that cognitive behavior therapy, and actually lots of different therapies, are about this. It's really about learning to ask yourself questions. So ask yourself questions about what's triggering me, what thoughts am I having that maybe I could change? What are those physical symptoms that I might need to manage? What are those behaviors that might not be healthy? And then looking at this process of being able to ask yourself questions in a way that helps you solve problems. And I think in a lot of ways, this cognitive behavior therapy resonates with police, especially because that's also what your profession is about, is learning to ask other questions. And so this is just flipping that a little bit, about turning it internally to ask yourself questions to sort of move forward in a different way. This ICBT approach has been extremely well researched for it seems probably hard to believe, but it's been around since the 1990s that it's been evolving. And around the world, there's research that's been done on this, and the effects are really found to be equivalent to face-to-face treatment. So it's not like it's a second-rate treatment. So if this is something that you're interested in, you basically go to our website, that pspnet.ca. When you get to the website, you'll see a page that looks like this. On the left-hand side, it says click here for online therapy for PSP. And on the right-hand side, it's click here for online resources for PSP families that Nathalie is going to speak about in a minute here. If you click on the left-hand bar, you'll then come to a page that describes the different types of courses that we offer. So the most common one is this therapist guided wellbeing course. We also have a PTSD specific course for anybody who really knows, like, PTSD is my concern and I want to focus on that exclusively. That course has the same types of strategies, but all the content is focused on PTSD. We do have a self-guided course for somebody who says, I don't feel like I need the therapist support, but I'd like to learn. Or maybe I might need the therapist support, but I just still want to do it on my own and I want to learn. So what you do there is there's a blue bar that says learn more. If you click that, it will tell you more about it. If you're interested, you click the red bar and you basically sign up. Of note, we really heard from PSP how concerned they are about their spouses. And so we took that same well-being course and we spent a couple of years working on tailoring it to spouses. So they're learning those same skills, but instead of having stories of PSP, we have stories of spouses, but really take into account the how your mental health is influenced by, being part of a family. One thing that I'd like to emphasize about all the courses is that it's not just about what you're facing at work. So when you're in these courses, you're also learning skills that apply to every aspect of your life. And that includes with the spouse well-being courses. This is about your own mental health, but also learning just generally about mental health that helps support you in this PSP family. So it's just a graphic that shows what we offer. That well-being course, PTSD course, are in English and French. That well-being course, as I mentioned, is therapist guided and self-guided. The PTSD course we only offer with therapist guidance just because we feel it's more intensive. And sometimes people need a little bit extra support. The therapist guided options are available in 6 provinces and the self-guided is available across the country. And I also just want to mention that we just launched a sleep course. And we really did this because, as you saw, whenever we look at depression, anxiety, or PTSD, the top symptom is always sleep. And so we wanted to have available a course that really helps people understand sleep. And it's a 4-lesson course that goes over different things that you should know about sleep. So the first one is just understanding sleep. The second lesson is understanding the key strategies that we know are effective for helping people with sleep. The third one is helping people with their thoughts around sleep. And then the fourth one is around behaviors related to sleep. So wind down and up routines, I guess. And also, then there's some extra resources in there. So there's things on nightmares and myths and also shift work as well. In terms of how this works, in all of the courses, you start with some intake questionnaires. In the therapist guided courses, there's an intake phone call. You then start the course, you're given a username and password to work on the course materials. You'll get automated emails that will prompt you through those materials. And then if you're in a therapist guided course, they'll send secure messages or phone calls, depending on what you need. And then at the end, we have questionnaires. Well, actually, throughout, there's some questionnaires because it helps us understand how you're doing. But at the end, we also do them so that we can get some feedback on our courses. And that actually helps us improve things as we go along. The lesson content, I know that sometimes people are really reluctant to take a course. You probably have some experiences of what it's like to take a course, but we really do try and make it very engaging. Lots of pictures, easy reading, videos, case stories, lots of guides, frequently asked questions. We have people track symptoms as they go through. And then we have many additional resources that help people tailor the materials also to their specific concerns. So for example, if alcohol is an issue, there's an extra resource in alcohol. For some people, moral injury can be an issue. Very common that most of our clients will look at the relationship resource, and anger would be another one that would be very common. But basically clients pick if they want to do any of these or all or just a few. Most people would pick 2 or 3, depending on their concerns. Ultimately, what we're trying to do with PSPNET is just realize this thing that Casey talked about again. Casey, I need to take you to all my talks, is that our mental health is it has to be an enduring mental health habit when we are constantly exposed to stress. This applies to me as well in my job and what I get exposed to. It just has to be something that you constantly work on, and not in a and once you build those skills, it's not a hard thing. It's just being sort of aware of what's going on and when you need to implement strategies that you can use during times of stress. So what have we found? Well, we've had over 2,000 clients enroll in our services. About 34% come from policing. We've had over 200 Sask police enrolled, and 81% have opted for therapist guidance. Lots of diversity. This kind of reflects what you would expect of where people would live and their backgrounds. About half come with depression, about 40% with anxiety, and about 30% with post-traumatic stress. And I should mention that about 15% of police come proactively, so that you just want to get on top of this, know this information, because they can see, what's to come, or they might see things that are starting to progress. And I think that's really positive. So far, we've had over 116 police who've completed, and this is what they had to say, who've completed our outcome measures, and we've published these particular studies as well. So they say it was worth their time, that it increases their confidence to manage their symptoms, and that they do see these big improvements on measures of depression, anxiety, PTSD, panic, anger, and it also helps with sleep. Ultimately, ICBT is really trying to do the same thing that face-to-face treatment does. We're trying to get people support, to help people gain insight, and then really make changes. If you want to change how you feel, ultimately you have to kind of change how you think. You have to make some kind of change. Sort of once we get stuck in a pattern, making some kind of change, even if it's a small change, is important to feeling better. This is the type of feedback that we get that really highlights this idea that people do feel supported when they take this course. So they say, I enjoyed the one-on-one therapy. My assigned therapist was very encouraging, has always had a suggestion if I needed one. They talk about gaining insight. So it gave me the tools and words to describe how I'm feeling. And actually, that in and of itself is sometimes really helpful and made me realize that I'm not alone. And you're not alone when you look at those percentages of people who are struggling at any one time. If you are experiencing these things, you are not alone. It's made me become aware of my thoughts and symptoms and also how they're impacting myself and my family. And then in terms of that changes, this is just an example though. So it became easier to identify those thoughts and behaviors and how to manage them. So I guess what I'd like you to know is, first of all, this is an entirely free service. It's highly supported by research. It's focused on PSP and helping you self-manage. It's convenient and it's private. You might know people in your life who would also benefit from something like this. And I also run this online therapy unit for the province of Saskatchewan. So we provide free online therapy to all adults 18 years and older. And to get that service, you just go to onlinetherapyuser.ca, or you can email otu@uregina.ca. And in that particular unit, we have that same well-being course, except it's for the general population. It hasn't been tailored for PSP. We have a course that helps people cope with chronic health conditions. We have a course for alcohol, if anybody's having difficulties with alcohol. We have a sleep course as well. And we have a course for new and expecting parents. So those are the 8-week courses, and a couple of single lesson courses for somebody who just wants a mental health tune-up, or if somebody wants to get some ideas about how can I help somebody else. Again, these are all free, and that's because we have support from the government of Saskatchewan.